I'm Alexander Thornton, a 32-year-old tech entrepreneur from Boston who always tried to earn my parents' approval. Despite my success, they always favored my younger brother Ethan. When my parents' restaurant faced bankruptcy, I invested $120,000 to save it. Then, the unthinkable happened. They uninvited me from the family Thanksgiving dinner because my brother's girlfriend couldn't stand me. What happened next changed our relationship forever. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by family. Growing up in Brookline, a middle-class neighborhood just outside Boston proper, I always felt like an outsider in my own family. Our modest two-story colonial house was comfortable enough, but emotionally, I never quite found my place there. From my earliest memories, there was always something missing. A warmth that seemed reserved for my brother, but rarely extended to me. I was the academically gifted child, straight A's, science fair winner, math team captain. By third grade, I was reading at a high school level and building basic computer programs while other kids were trading baseball cards. My teachers called me exceptional. My parents called me different. Not in a celebratory way, but with a slight undertone of confusion, as if they weren't quite sure what to do with a child who preferred building robots to playing catch in the backyard. My parents, Harold and Martha Thornton, poured their life savings into opening Thornton's, an Italian restaurant with my father's grandmother's recipes as its claim to fame. The restaurant became their entire world, and the stage where my brother Ethan shined brightest. 3 years younger than me, Ethan was everything I wasn't. Athletic, effortlessly charismatic, the kind of kid who made friends within minutes of meeting someone. He was also incredibly irresponsible, but somehow, that was always overlooked. The favoritism wasn't subtle. When Ethan made the junior varsity baseball team in freshman year, my parents closed the restaurant for an entire weekend to attend his first tournament in Springfield. They had never even attended a single one of my science competitions, not even when I represented our school at the state level. The restaurant can't run itself, Alexander, they'd say. Somehow, that rule didn't apply when it came to Ethan's activities. For my 16th birthday, after months of hints, I received a used Trek mountain bike that I later discovered my father had bought from our neighbor for $100. When Ethan turned 16, he got a brand new Ford Mustang. The justification? Ethan needs reliable transportation to his baseball practices. Never mind that I had been biking 4 miles each way to my advanced placement classes at the community college. These patterns continued throughout high school, but rather than breaking me down, they fueled my determination. If I couldn't earn their approval through traditional achievements, I'd make myself so successful they couldn't possibly ignore me. I threw myself into my studies, taking every advanced class available, joining every academic club, building my college application into something impossible to overlook. When I received my acceptance letter from MIT with a full scholarship, I expected at least some acknowledgement of my achievement. Instead, my father glanced at the letter and said, "That's nice, son. Did you hear Ethan might get scouted for a college team?" My mother simply reminded me not to get a big head because pride comes before a fall. That night, I locked myself in my room and promised myself that one day they'd see my true worth. College became my escape. At MIT, surrounded by peers who valued intelligence and innovation, I finally found my tribe. That's where I met Marcus Wilson, who quickly became my best friend, and, in many ways, the supportive family member I'd never had. Marcus was the first person to name what was happening in my family. "Dude," he said after witnessing a particularly painful phone call with my parents, "that's not normal. They're toxic, man. You deserve better." I started dating Rachel Bennett during my junior year. Smart, perceptive, and studying psychology, Rachel noticed the dynamic immediately when she joined me for a rare dinner at my parents' house. "Your parents barely asked you a single question about your life," she observed on the drive back to campus. "But they wanted to know every detail about Ethan's summer internship at that sporting goods store." She was right, of course, but hearing someone else validate what I'd experienced my whole life was both comforting and painful. After graduation, my career took off quickly. I co-founded a startup developing security software for financial institutions, and within 3 years, we had major banks as clients. I was making 6 figures before I turned 25. But old habits die hard. When my parents called saying they needed $5,000 for emergency restaurant repairs, I transferred the money immediately, seeing it as an opportunity to finally earn their approval. "We'll pay you back next month," my father promised. They never did. Not that month, not the next, not ever. But they did call again 6 months later, needing another $2,000 for a new refrigerator. Again, I sent the money, hoping that somewhere in these transactions there might be the appreciation I'd always craved. Looking back now, I can see I was trying to buy the affection that should have been freely given, and they were more than happy to take what I offered, without ever providing what I needed. Fast forward to 3 years ago. By then, I had built my company into a successful venture with 47 employees and annual revenue exceeding $7 million. We'd just secured a major contract with an international banking group, and I'd finally moved into my dream apartment in downtown Boston with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. On paper, I had everything except my parents' recognition that I had made something of myself. Meanwhile, Thornton's was struggling. A combination of an economic downturn, increased competition from trendy new restaurants, and my parents' reluctance to update their business model had put them in a precarious position. Their customer base was aging, and they weren't attracting enough new patrons to sustain the business. Ethan had been working at the restaurant on and off since dropping out of community college after 3 semesters. Working might be generous. He took shifts when it suited him, called in sick whenever a better social opportunity arose, and still somehow held the title of assistant manager. He drew a salary that the struggling business could ill afford while contributing minimal value. That spring, Ethan started dating Natalie Porter. The first time I met her was at a family dinner at the restaurant. She was attractive in a carefully calculated way, designer clothes, perfect makeup, and a laugh that changed pitch depending on who she was talking to. Within minutes of meeting me, I could feel her sizing me up, calculating my worth and potential usefulness. "So you work with computers?" she asked with a slight curl of her lip when Ethan reluctantly introduced us. "I own a cybersecurity firm," I corrected. "Oh, like IT support? How interesting." Her dismissive tone made it clear she found it anything but. Throughout that dinner, Natalie made subtle digs and passive-aggressive comments toward me, while lavishing attention on my parents. She complimented my mother's outfit, a blouse I'd bought her for Christmas that she had never acknowledged, asked my father detailed questions about the restaurant's history, and placed her hand on Ethan's arm possessively whenever I spoke. Over the next few months, I began hearing strange things from my parents. "Natalie mentioned you seemed very stressed about work," my mother said during one call, though I had never discussed my work stress with Natalie. Another time, my father commented, "Natalie thought it was odd you didn't bring a date to their housewarming." I hadn't even been invited to a housewarming. I slowly realized Natalie was spreading small lies about me. Nothing dramatic enough to confront, but consistent undermining that painted me as either arrogant, antisocial, or both. And my parents, who had always been predisposed to think the worst of me, absorbed these narratives without question. Meanwhile, the restaurant's financial troubles were mounting. My parents started calling me frequently about their business struggles. Subtle at first, then increasingly direct. "The new place down the street has taken half our regular customers," my father lamented. "The equipment is breaking down, and repairs are so expensive these days," my mother added. My business partner, James Peterson, noticed the increasing frequency of these calls. During a strategy meeting, while I was checking yet another text from my parents, he finally spoke up. "Alex, I've known you for 7 years, and every time your family has a problem, you throw money at it. Has that ever actually fixed things between you?" I didn't have a good answer, James continued. "Mixing family and finances usually ends with neither intact. Just, be careful, man." I should have listened. But a lifetime of conditioning is hard to break. When my parents called me in tears, saying the restaurant was facing foreclosure and they were $50,000 in debt, my protective walls crumbled. "We might lose everything, Alexander," my mother sobbed. "The restaurant, the house, everything we've worked for our entire lives. Your father can't sleep. His blood pressure is through the roof. I'm worried about his health." We wouldn't ask if we had anywhere else to turn. I spent a sleepless night debating what to do. James's warning echoed in my mind, but so did my father's voice. Family takes care of family. The next morning, I called my financial advisor and liquidated some investments. I'll help, I told my parents the next day. I can clear the debts and fund some renovations to help modernize the place. But this needs to be a turning point. We need to update the business model too. I transferred $80,000, $50,000 to clear their immediate debts and $30,000 for renovations. I insisted were necessary to attract new customers. The gratitude in that moment seemed genuine. My mother cried and hugged me. My father, not usually one for physical affection, clasped my shoulder with tears in his eyes. "You're saving our legacy, son," he said. It was perhaps the most meaningful acknowledgement he'd ever given me. In that moment, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I had finally earned the place in the family I'd always longed for. For the next 6 months, I experienced what felt like a new relationship with my parents. I was invited to weekly family dinners. My mother called just to chat. My father asked for my opinion on business decisions. I wasn't naive enough to think one financial intervention had erased a lifetime of emotional neglect, but I allowed myself to hope that maybe this was a turning point. I threw myself into helping revitalize the restaurant. I designed a new website, implemented a reservation system, and hired a consultant to update their menu while preserving the traditional favorites. I spent weekends helping my father replace outdated lighting and install a new point-of-sale system. For the first time, we were working side by side as equals, rather than as the perpetually disappointing son and his perpetually unimpressed father. But subtle signs began emerging that the fundamental dynamics hadn't really changed. When I suggested we feature some of the new menu items on social media, my father was resistant until Ethan offered the same suggestion a week later. Then it was brilliant. When I mentioned that Ethan had been 2 hours late for his shift 3 times in 1 week, my mother immediately defended him. "He's going through a lot with his new relationship. You've always had things easier, being naturally focused." Still, I was making peace with these small injustices because, for the first time, I felt included in the family unit. Then came the kitchen crisis. The ancient cooking equipment was failing regularly, causing service delays and frustrating customers. I offered another $40,000 for a complete kitchen renovation. "The energy savings alone will help recoup some of this investment," I explained as I transferred the funds. "And you'll be able to serve more customers during peak hours." The kitchen renovation was completed, just as business began picking up, thanks to our earlier changes. During one of my visits to check on progress, the restaurant manager, Derek Collins, pulled me aside in the storage room. "I wanted to thank you personally for saving this place," he said, his voice low. "I've worked here for 12 years, and I was worried I'd be out of a job." I waved off his thanks. "I'm just glad it's working out." Derek hesitated, then added, "Look, I probably shouldn't say anything, but are you aware of how your brother and his girlfriend have been using the restaurant accounts?" That conversation led me to examine the restaurant's financial records, which showed several $1,000s of unexplained withdrawals labeled as miscellaneous expenses. When I confronted Ethan in the empty restaurant after closing, his reaction was immediate defensiveness. "You think you can buy your way into controlling everything?" he shouted. "This is our family business, not one of your tech investments." "I'm not trying to control anything," I replied, keeping my voice measured. "I'm trying to understand why there's $3,000 missing last month with no receipts. Maybe Dad needed it for suppliers who only take cash. Maybe there were repairs. You don't know everything just because you write checks." The argument escalated until Ethan stormed out. The next day, my mother called, her voice tight with disappointment in me, not Ethan. "Your brother is very upset. He says you accused him of stealing." I asked about unexplained withdrawals from the business account. I clarified. "Well, your father and I trust Ethan completely. He practically runs the place when we're not there. I think you need to apologize." This pattern continued and intensified. I later learned from Derek that Natalie had been telling my parents I was trying to take over the restaurant and push Ethan out. "She's always in your mother's ear," Derek explained. "And whatever your mother believes, your father goes along with." I tried talking to my parents about Natalie's behavior directly. "I feel like there's been some miscommunication," I began carefully during a Sunday dinner. "Natalie seems to have formed some opinions about me that aren't accurate." My mother's back stiffened immediately. "Natalie has been nothing but supportive of this family. She's helped design new menus, she's brought in friends as customers, and she makes Ethan happy." I don't understand why you can't just be happy for your brother. Despite these tensions, the restaurant was finally turning around financially. The renovated space and updated menu were attracting new customers. Online reviews were improving. The business was finally operating in the black again, though I had yet to see any movement toward repaying even a token amount of what I'd invested. As November approached, talk turned to the annual Thanksgiving celebration. Thornton's had a tradition of closing to the public on Thanksgiving and hosting an elaborate family dinner in the main dining room. Growing up, this event had often highlighted my outsider status. Ethan would be praised for carving the turkey, while my offers to help were relegated to washing dishes in the back. This year, however, I allowed myself to believe things would be different. "We should have so much to celebrate this Thanksgiving," my mother said during a phone call in early November. The restaurant doing well again, the family all together. I spent the next 2 weeks helping my parents plan a special menu for the celebration. During these planning sessions, Natalie's hostility became increasingly obvious. She would sigh audibly when I made suggestions, roll her eyes when I was speaking to my parents, and make comments like, "That seems like a waste of money," regarding ideas I proposed. The week before Thanksgiving, I arrived at the restaurant for final preparations and overheard Natalie talking to my mother in the office. "I just find it so difficult to be around him, Martha," she was saying. "He's so controlling about everything. It's like he thinks he owns the place just because he helped out financially. I know he's your son, but does he have to be at every family event?" I didn't hear my mother's full reply, but I caught phrases like complicated relationship and try to understand. She wasn't defending me, she was sympathizing with Natalie. Later that same day, I discovered that Ethan and Natalie had moved into my parents' house temporarily while their apartment was being renovated. Information no one had bothered to share with me, despite our frequent communication about Thanksgiving plans. The next evening, 3 days before Thanksgiving, my phone rang with my mother's number. Her voice was strained when I answered. "Alexander, I need to talk to you about Thursday." "I'm still bringing the wine we discussed," I replied. "Do you need me to come earlier to help set up?" A long pause. "Actually, your father and I were thinking, it might be better if you didn't come this year." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? Why?" "Well, it's Natalie. She's feeling very uncomfortable around you. She says you've been critical of her relationship with Ethan and judgmental about her involvement in the restaurant." "That's completely untrue," I said, my voice rising in disbelief. "When have I ever—" "Please don't make this more difficult," my mother interrupted. "Ethan says she was in tears last night about it. We just want a peaceful holiday. You understand, don't you? Family has to come first." The irony of her words was stunning. Family first except for me. I wasn't family enough to defend, to include, to choose over someone who had entered their lives less than a year ago. "Let me get this straight," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I've given you $120,000 to save your restaurant, and now I'm being uninvited from Thanksgiving dinner because Ethan's girlfriend doesn't like me? Don't be dramatic, Alexander. It's just one dinner. And please don't bring up the money that makes it sound like you expect special treatment because of it." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence in my apartment, staring at the Boston skyline as darkness fell. The devastating realization washed over me. $120,000 couldn't buy what had never been for sale: my parents' love and respect. In their eyes, I would always be worth less than Ethan, regardless of what I contributed. The week before Thanksgiving should have been filled with anticipation and warmth. Instead, I found myself in a state of emotional shock after being uninvited from my own family's celebration. The preparations I'd been helping with, the special menu, featuring both traditional items and some upscale additions I'd suggested, would go on without me. The wine I'd specially ordered from a boutique vineyard in Napa would be enjoyed by everyone except the person who'd selected it. I had been at the restaurant just 2 days earlier, helping my parents finalize everything. My mother had seemed genuinely appreciative as I suggested ways to streamline the cooking process so she wouldn't be exhausted by the time dinner was served. My father had nodded approvingly when I offered to bring an expensive bourbon for after-dinner drinks. There had been no indication that my presence at the actual event was in jeopardy. Now, I couldn't stop replaying every interaction I'd had with Natalie over the past months, searching for what might have triggered her apparent campaign against me. Yes, I had questioned some financial irregularities that coincided with her increasing presence at the restaurant. Yes, I had occasionally disagreed with her suggestions for the business, like replacing longtime suppliers with friends of hers who charged higher prices. But I had always been professional, never personal in my objections. That night, sleep was impossible. I paced my apartment, alternating between disbelief, hurt, and a slow-burning anger. By morning, I had developed a pounding headache that no amount of aspirin could touch. I called into work, something I rarely did, unable to face video conferences and strategic decisions when my personal life was imploding. At 11 that morning, I called Marcus, my voice still rough with emotion as I explained what had happened. They did? What? Marcus's outrage was immediate and validating. After everything you've done for them? Are you kidding me? I wish I were, I replied. Alex, I've tried to be respectful about your family for years, but this crosses every line. This isn't love. This isn't even basic decency. No one treats family like this, especially not family who's financially saved their asses. Hearing my best friend articulate what I was feeling helped solidify the shifting emotions into something clearer. I had been betrayed by the people who should have been most loyal to me. My phone pinged with a text from Ethan. Mom says you're upset about Thanksgiving. Don't be so dramatic. It's just one dinner. We can do Christmas instead if it's that big a deal. Just one dinner. The same dismissive language my mother had used. As if the issue was the meal itself, rather than what it represented being excluded from my own family, at the request of someone who had known them for less than a year, while they were still benefiting from my financial support. That afternoon, I decided to calculate exactly how much money I had given my parents over the years. I pulled up bank statements, scrolled through transfer records, and created a spreadsheet. The initial $80,000 for debt clearance and renovations. The subsequent $40,000 for kitchen upgrades. But there were also numerous smaller transfers I had almost forgotten. $5,000 for emergency plumbing repairs, $3,000 for a consultant to help with staff training, $2,000 for a new sign, and countless smaller amounts for various needs. The grand total, $137,450 over the past 3 years alone. Not a single dollar had been repaid. Not even a token amount. There had been no payment plan suggested, no interest offered, not even acknowledgement of the debt in recent months. My parents had taken my money and, in return, had just taken me for granted. While staring at that spreadsheet, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of seeking approval, of trying to earn love through achievement, generosity, and self-effacement, suddenly seemed not just futile, but actively harmful. I had been enabling a dynamic that would never change, because it benefited everyone but me. I remembered something my therapist, Dr. Sarah Miller, had told me months earlier. Alexander, you can't buy love. And if you could, would it be worth having? At the time, I'd nodded, but hadn't fully internalized the message. Now, looking at the cold, hard numbers of my failed attempts to purchase family acceptance, the truth of her words hit home. In that moment, sitting alone in my apartment, with irrefutable evidence of my family's willingness to take without giving back, I made the decision that would ultimately change everything. I was done being used. The morning after being uninvited from Thanksgiving, I scheduled an appointment with my financial advisor, Philip Hayes. I brought my spreadsheet detailing all the money I had given to my parents. I need to understand my options here, I explained. These were presented as loans, but there's no formal documentation. Philip reviewed the information and sighed. Without promissory notes or loan agreements, legally these look more like gifts than loans. You could try to argue in court that there was an implicit understanding, but that's what I figured, I said. Following that meeting, I consulted with a lawyer who confirmed what Philip had suggested. Without documentation, recovering the money would be an uphill battle that would likely destroy any remaining family relationship while costing me even more in legal fees. The courts generally don't like to get involved in family financial disputes without clear documentation, the lawyer explained. Your best option might be a formal conversation establishing repayment terms going forward, if that's what you want. But as I left his office, I realized that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to fight my family for money. I wanted them to recognize their treatment of me was wrong, not just financially, but emotionally. Since that seemed unlikely to happen, my next best option was to protect myself from further harm. That afternoon, I had an emergency session with Dr. Sarah Miller, my therapist of 2 years. What they did was cruel, she acknowledged after I explained the situation. And it's the culmination of a lifelong pattern, not an isolated incident. So what do I do now? I asked. That depends on what you want the end result to be, she replied. Do you want to maintain a relationship with your parents and brother? Do you want the money back? Or do you need to establish boundaries to protect your own well-being? Her questions helped clarify my thinking. I didn't expect to get the money back, and I wasn't sure what kind of relationship was possible with people who could so easily discard me. What I needed most immediately was to stop the bleeding, both financially and emotionally. Over the next 2 days, I developed a careful plan for withdrawal. First, I contacted my bank and canceled all automatic payments going to my parents' business accounts, monthly transfers I had set up for ongoing support that they had begun to take for granted. Next, I logged into the restaurant management software I had purchased and installed for them. While I couldn't ethically remove the system entirely that would harm the business operations and the innocent employees, I could transfer the ownership of the accounts to myself rather than leaving them under the restaurant's name. This meant that if they wanted to make significant changes to the systems, they would need to contact me or pay for new licenses. I spent hours drafting and redrafting an email to my parents, trying to find the right balance between explaining my hurt and maintaining my dignity. The final version read, Mom and Dad, I've had time to reflect on our conversation about Thanksgiving. Being excluded from a family celebration at the request of someone who has known our family less than a year has forced me to reevaluate our relationship. Over the past 3 years, I have provided $137,450 to support the restaurant and, by extension, our family. I did this out of love and a desire to help, never expecting to be treated as an outsider in return. Effective immediately, I am discontinuing all financial support. The automatic transfers have been stopped. The software systems will continue to function, but ownership has been transferred to me, and any major changes will require new subscriptions. I need time and space to consider what kind of relationship is possible between us going forward. Please respect this boundary by not contacting me for the next 30 days. After that time, if you wish to discuss rebuilding our relationship on more equal and respectful terms, I will be open to that conversation. Alexander. After sending the email, I turned off my phone, packed a suitcase, and booked a last-minute trip to a small beach resort in the Florida Keys. I needed physical distance to match the emotional boundary I was establishing. I informed my company I would be working remotely for a week, and then I disconnected from everything related to my family. Those 7 days in Florida became a turning point in my life. Each morning, I sat on the beach watching the sunrise, allowing myself to fully feel the grief of accepting that my family might never be what I had always hoped. Each afternoon I swam in the ocean until exhaustion overcame the anxiety that tried to convince me I was overreacting. Each evening, I journaled, working through decades of memories and patterns that Dr. Miller had helped me identify. By the time I returned to Boston and turned my phone back on, I had reached a state of painful clarity. My parents had never been capable of giving me the unconditional love I sought, and no amount of money or achievement would change that fundamental reality. The voicemails and texts flooded in as soon as my phone reconnected. My mother, alternating between tearful pleas and guilt trips. How could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you? My father, gruff and accusatory. This is no way for a son to behave. You're acting like a child. Ethan, outright hostile. You've ruined everything. Mom hasn't stopped crying. Is that what you wanted? Among the messages was one from Derek, the restaurant manager. I don't want to get in the middle of family business, but I thought you should know that your parents have been talking about making Ethan and Natalie part owners of the restaurant as a Christmas gift. I think they were planning to use the improvements you paid for as leverage for a bank loan to make it happen. I just thought you deserved to know, considering how much you've put into this place. That message confirmed what I had begun to suspect. My financial contributions were never seen as investments to be respected or repaid, but as resources to be exploited for Ethan's benefit. The restaurant I had saved wasn't being preserved as a family legacy, but being positioned as a gift to my brother and his girlfriend, the same girlfriend whose discomfort was important enough to exclude me from Thanksgiving. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I set up an email autoresponder. I am taking time to focus on my personal well-being. If this is regarding the financial matters previously discussed, please contact my attorney, whose information is below. Otherwise, I will respond when I am ready to resume communication. It was the first time in my life I had prioritized my own emotional health over my family's demands. Though painful, it also carried an unexpected feeling of liberation. 2 months of relative silence followed my withdrawal of support. I maintained minimal contact with my family, responding to direct questions with brief, factual answers, but engaging in no emotional discussions. I focused instead on my own healing, continuing regular sessions with Dr. Miller, reconnecting with friends I had neglected while pouring energy into my parents' restaurant, and even beginning to date again. Through Derek, who occasionally texted updates he thought I should know, I learned that the restaurant was beginning to struggle again. Without my financial safety net and technical support, small problems were becoming larger ones. A freezer breakdown that would have been a minor inconvenience before became a major financial hit. The website crashed during a busy reservation period, and they lacked the expertise to fix it quickly. As December approached, I decided to stay in Boston for Christmas, rather than fly to visit college friends as I'd initially planned. Something told me I needed to be physically present, even if I maintained my emotional distance from my family. I made arrangements to stay with Marcus during the holiday week. "You sure you want to be in the same city as them during Christmas?" he asked when I told him my plans. "I think I need to be," I replied. "Not for them, but for me. To prove I can be near them without falling back into old patterns." My instincts proved correct. 3 days before Christmas, my father appeared outside my office building as I was leaving work. "We need to talk, son," he said, without preamble. He looked older than I remembered, the lines in his face deeper, his shoulders slightly stooped. "I'm not ready for that conversation yet," I replied, keeping my voice calm but firm. "The restaurant is in trouble. Your mother is worried sick." "Is that what you wanted? To punish us?" "I'm not punishing anyone, Dad. I'm just no longer willing to be taken for granted." He followed me halfway down the block, alternating between appeals to family loyalty and thinly veiled accusations about my character. I maintained my boundaries and eventually got into a taxi, leaving him on the sidewalk. 2 days later, it was Ethan who showed up, pounding on my apartment door at 11 at night, clearly intoxicated. "You've destroyed everything," he shouted when I opened the door. "The restaurant's failing, Mom and Dad are fighting all the time, and Natalie left me. Are you happy now?" I didn't invite him in. "I'm sorry you're going through a difficult time, but I didn't cause any of this." "You cut them off. They were counting on your money." "That's exactly the problem, Ethan. They should never have been counting on my money without a plan to stand on their own." He continued ranting until a neighbor threatened to call security. Before leaving, he jabbed a finger at my chest. "You always think you're better than everyone. Guess what? You're just alone." His words stung because they targeted a deep-seated fear that establishing healthy boundaries would indeed leave me alone. But Dr. Miller had prepared me for this. "Guilt is the weapon of choice for families resistant to change," she had warned. "Remember that loneliness is sometimes the temporary cost of self-respect." Over the next few weeks, flying monkeys descended. Family friends called to check in, but really to pressure me to reconcile. Distant relatives sent messages about the importance of family. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, cornered me outside a coffee shop. "Your mother is devastated," she told me. "Whatever disagreement you're having, surely it can be resolved. Family is all we have in the end." I had prepared for these interventions. "I appreciate your concern," I told each well-meaning messenger. "This is between my parents and me, and we'll work through it in our own time." In early January, I discovered someone had posted negative reviews of my company online, claiming our software had security flaws and our customer service was unresponsive. The writing style and specific grievances were familiar enough that I suspected Natalie immediately. I had our IT team trace the IP addresses, and sure enough, they matched her parents' home where she had moved after breaking up with Ethan. Rather than engaging directly, I had our legal team send a cease and desist letter regarding the false reviews. They were removed within days, and no new ones appeared. By mid-January, the situation at the restaurant had deteriorated significantly. Derek reported that they were struggling to make payroll and had returned to the predatory lenders they had used before my intervention. "Your dad looked into remortgaging their house," he texted one evening. And they've cut staff hours. Everyone's worried. A week later, I received my first direct communication from my parents in months. A text message from my mother. Alexander, we know things have been difficult between us. The restaurant is facing serious problems. Your father's blood pressure is concerning the doctor. We miss you and would like to talk. The business needs your expertise, if nothing else. I noted that even in their attempt at reconciliation, the restaurant's needs came before our relationship. I replied simply, I'm sorry to hear about Dad's health. I'm still taking the space I need. I hope things improve. It was hard to maintain my boundaries, especially knowing they were in genuine distress. The lifelong programming to sacrifice my well-being for family approval ran deep. But each time I was tempted to rescue them again, I reminded myself of Thanksgiving, of being excluded and discarded, despite everything I had contributed. In February, Ethan and Natalie's breakup became final, apparently ending in a dramatic public argument at the restaurant during the Valentine's Day dinner service. According to Derek, Natalie had been pushing for a formal role in the business, and when my parents' financial situation made that impossible, she accused Ethan of misleading her about his prospects. I couldn't deny feeling a certain satisfaction that the natural consequences of their actions were finally manifesting. The girlfriend they had prioritized over me had abandoned ship when the financial waters got rough. The son they had always favored was proving incapable of providing solutions to the crisis. The restaurant they had used as a weapon of emotional manipulation was becoming a millstone around their necks. Yet beneath that satisfaction was a genuine sadness. I hadn't wanted punishment or revenge. I had simply wanted recognition and respect. Their suffering brought me no real joy, only confirmation that the patterns were too deeply entrenched for easy resolution. In early March, Vincent Carter, a longtime family friend who had known me since childhood, reached out asking to meet for coffee. Unlike the others who had contacted me, Vincent had always been kind and had sometimes tried to compensate for my parents' favoritism by showing special interest in my achievements. We met at a quiet cafe near the public garden. Vincent didn't immediately press me about reconciliation, which I appreciated. I want to understand your perspective, he said after some initial catching up. Your parents are telling one story, but I've known you long enough to suspect there's more to it. For the first time, I shared the full context with someone from my parents' social circle, the lifelong favoritism, the financial support that had never been acknowledged, and finally, the Thanksgiving exclusion that had broken something fundamental in me. Vincent listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. I had no idea, he said when I finished. I knew Ethan was always the golden child, but I didn't realize how pervasive it was or how much you've done for them financially. It's not about the money, I clarified. It's about what the money represents my continuing attempts to earn a place in my own family, and their continuing message that nothing I do will ever be enough. Vincent nodded slowly. I think I understand now. And I'm sorry, Alexander. No child should have to buy their parents' approval. That conversation marked a turning point. Vincent offered to speak with my parents, not to pressure me into reconciliation, but to help them understand the deeper issues at play. Sometimes people can hear hard truths more easily from a friend than from someone they've hurt, he suggested. A week later, my parents reached out again, but this time, the message was different. Alexander, we've been thinking a lot about what Vincent told us. We didn't realize how our actions have affected you over the years. We're not asking for money or help with the restaurant. We just want a chance to talk. No pressure, no expectations, just talk. It was the first communication from them that didn't include a request or a guilt trip. I wasn't naive enough to believe one conversation with Vincent had transformed them, but it seemed possible they were finally willing to acknowledge there was a problem beyond my overreaction to Thanksgiving. After consulting with Dr. Miller, I agreed to meet them not at their house or the restaurant, but on neutral ground with clear time boundaries. The stage was set for either a new beginning or a final ending to our relationship. We met at a quiet conference room. Vincent had arranged at his law office downtown, a neutral space where none of us held home court advantage. I arrived 15 minutes early, bringing with me a folder containing printouts of every financial transaction between us over the years. I wasn't planning to demand repayment, but I wanted concrete evidence to prevent any gaslighting about the extent of my support. My parents arrived exactly on time, looking simultaneously familiar and strange. My father had lost weight, his signature robust presence diminished. My mother's hair showed more gray than I remembered, and she had dark circles under her eyes. They both seemed hesitant, unsure of the protocol for this unprecedented type of meeting with their son. "Thank you for coming," I began, taking control of the conversation immediately. "I think it's important we speak honestly about what's happened." My father's instinct to dominate reasserted itself. "Son, we know you're upset about Thanksgiving, but..." I held up my hand. "This isn't just about Thanksgiving. That was simply the final straw, after a lifetime of being treated as less valuable than Ethan." "That's not fair," my mother interjected. "We've always loved both our sons equally." I opened the folder and placed the financial summary on the table between us. "These are my contributions to the restaurant and to you personally over the past 3 years. $137,450. Not a single payment has been made toward repaying any of it. Not even a payment plan was suggested. Does that seem like equal treatment when compared to how you've supported Ethan?" They stared at the paper, the concrete evidence making it impossible to dismiss my claims as emotional exaggeration. "We always intended to pay you back," my father said, his voice lacking its usual certainty. "Did you? When? And why was I uninvited from Thanksgiving while you were benefiting from my financial support?" My directness seemed to catch them off guard. This wasn't the accommodating son they were accustomed to dealing with. "Natalie was uncomfortable," my mother said weakly. "And my comfort didn't matter? My feelings didn't matter? After everything I'd done for the family?" A long silence followed. Then, surprisingly, my mother's composure cracked. Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know why we did that," she whispered. "It was wrong. So wrong." It was perhaps the first time in my life I'd heard her admit to a mistake without qualification. My father was more resistant. "We've always done our best as parents," he insisted, though with less conviction than usual. "Maybe we made mistakes, but we never meant to hurt you." "Intent doesn't negate impact," I replied, quoting Dr. Miller. "You may not have meant to hurt me, but the pattern of favoring Ethan while taking my support for granted has been consistent throughout my life." Over the next 2 hours, we talked more honestly than we ever had before. I shared specific memories of feeling excluded and undervalued. My mother, gradually opening up, acknowledged that they had indeed held me to different standards than Ethan. "You were always so capable," she said, as if this explained everything. "You never seemed to need us the way he did." "I needed you just as much," I replied. "I just learned early that showing it wouldn't get me what I needed, so I became self-sufficient out of necessity, not preference." My father struggled more with accepting responsibility. He veered between defensiveness, "We had to run a business, we couldn't attend every school event," and deflection, "All siblings feel their parents are unfair sometimes." But even he eventually conceded that they had taken my financial support without proper acknowledgement or gratitude. "I guess we got used to you solving problems," he admitted reluctantly. "You made it look so easy." As the conversation progressed, I presented them with my terms for moving forward. "I'm willing to help you develop a plan to sell the restaurant for a fair price. Not a fire sale, but a responsible exit that will give you enough to retire modestly. But I have conditions." They looked at me expectantly. "First, I won't provide any additional funding. Second, any relationship between us going forward needs to be built on mutual respect, not just what I can provide for you. And third, if you want me in your lives, we need to attend family therapy together." My mother agreed almost immediately. My father hesitated longer, but eventually nodded his agreement as well. "We want you in our lives, Alexander," my mother said, reaching across the table toward my hand, but stopping short of touching me. "We've realized how much we took you for granted. It shouldn't have taken losing you to see that." 2 weeks later, we had our first appointment with Dr. Miller. The session was awkward and tense. My father was defensive, my mother emotional, and I was guarded. But it was a beginning. Over the following months, we established a pattern of weekly therapy sessions. Progress was neither linear nor rapid, but it was real. Through Dr. Miller's skilled guidance, my parents began to recognize patterns in their behavior that went beyond their treatment of me, ways they had used the restaurant as an extension of themselves, how they had enabled Ethan's irresponsibility out of a misguided desire to protect him, how their own parents had modeled similar dynamics. Meanwhile, I worked with a business broker to find a buyer for the restaurant. We eventually located a restaurant group looking to expand into the neighborhood who appreciated the history and reputation of Thornton's. The sale price wasn't spectacular, but provided enough for my parents to pay off their debts and have a modest retirement fund. 4 months into our therapy journey, Ethan asked to join us for a session. To my surprise, he came prepared with his own apology. "I've always been jealous of you," he admitted, the confession clearly difficult for him. "You were successful at everything you tried. I felt like I could never measure up, so I just stopped trying. It was easier to accept being the favorite than to compete with you and lose." His honesty opened the door to a new kind of relationship between us. Still not close, but no longer antagonistic. Without Natalie's influence, and with our parents no longer enabling his worst behaviors, Ethan began taking steps toward greater responsibility, eventually finding steady employment, managing another restaurant. By the time the restaurant sale closed, our family dynamics had shifted significantly. We weren't perfect old habits, occasionally resurfaced, and conversations sometimes still became tense, but there was a new foundation of honesty and accountability that had never existed before. As part of my own healing process, I established a small investment fund specifically for supporting food entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The first recipient was a talented chef from Dorchester who had worked at Thornton's for years without recognition. I structured it as a proper business investment with clear terms and expectations. No more mixing family and finances without boundaries. Looking back now, a year after that fateful Thanksgiving, I can see that my parents' decision to uninvite me was actually a painful gift. It forced me to confront a lifetime of unhealthy patterns and finally establish the boundaries I had always needed but never dared create. I've learned that real love doesn't require constant sacrifice or payment. I've learned that respect must be mutual to be meaningful. Most importantly, I've learned that my worth isn't determined by what I can provide to others, but by being valued for who I am. Our family gatherings are smaller now, quieter, and far from perfect, but they're based on choice rather than obligation, on growing respect rather than entrenched roles. This Thanksgiving, we're meeting at my apartment-neutral territory, where no one has the upper hand and everyone is bringing something to the table, literally and figuratively. If you're caught in a cycle of trying to buy love or approval from family members who continually take you for granted, know that breaking that cycle is possible. It's painful, it's scary, and it requires tremendous courage. But on the other side is the possibility of authentic relationships based on mutual respect. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family? How did it change your relationship? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences about finding self-worth and building healthy relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most necessary growth.